As you're coming in, let me introduce you to tonight's webinar. This is a webinar that is being hosted by Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network's Faith-based Caucus. The Faith-based Caucus meets every fourth Thursday of the month. And we meet virtually, and we are an interfaith caucus where we gather and talk about the need for peace on the Korean Peninsula. And today we have a special guest. Our speaker is Professor Keunjoo Christine Pae. Um, and um, and we're very excited because in our faith-based caucus, we have been talking a lot about Christian Zionism, especially in Korea, and how we've been wanting to know more about it. So let me introduce to you our speaker for today. So Professor Pae is a professor of religion and women's and gender studies and chair of religion at Denison University. She is an author of A Transpacific Imagination of Theology, Ethics, and Spiritual Activism, Doing Feminist Ethics Transnationally, published in 2023, and is the co-editor of Searching for the Future in the Past, Reclaiming Feminist Theological Visions, published in 2024, and Embodying Antiracist Christianity, Asian American Theological Resources for Just Racial Relations, published in 2023. She is an Episcopal priest who canonically resides in the Diocese of Newark. And today I will be moderating the discussion that will be happening later today. And hold on, let me see. And I think in the chat, there should be a list of there, or in the chat, we'll list the books that Professor Pae has published. Um, we'll have it as a Google Drive for you to look at later. Professor Pae, is there anything that I am missing in your introduction? Would you like to tell us anything more?
No, not at all. And thank you so much for inviting me to this space. And also, it's very nice to see some familiar faces and those who I have not seen for years. And it's a nice surprise to see some of you here. So I would like to talk about Korean Christian Zionism, and this is a part of my larger research. And the first part of my research is the political theology and political history of Christian Zionism in Korea. And then second part is like a Korean civil society's effort to be in solidarity with Palestine. So today I will strictly focus on the political history of Korean Christian Zionism. So approximately 1,000 Jews currently live in the Republic of Korea, and the vast majority of them are expatriates, including American military personnel. And there is no evidence that a Jewish community has ever existed on the Korean Peninsula. But despite the absence of Jews in Korean history, many Korean evangelicals express deep affection for Jews and fervent devotion to the state of Israel, as they believe that the state of Israel is the contemporary realization of Israel in their Bible. So why do many Korean evangelicals embrace Israel as if it were their own nation? And how has their theological admiration for the United States been transposed to Israel? So Christian Zionism on Korean soil demonstrates how far-right Korean evangelicals have politicized chosen people's nationalism or a hegemonic imagination that God had chosen South Korea, like the United States and Israel, for the pre-millennial kingdom. This hegemonic imagination shows far-right Korean evangelicals' desire for imperialism, driven by fears of political, social, and cultural crisis that resemble their interpretation of biblical apocalypse. The Korean Christian Zionism has received little scholarly attention, although this distinctive Christian theology has affected Korean geopolitics and international relations, as well as ordinary Christian life for a long time. It is difficult to estimate the size of Christian Zionists in Korea. And additionally, many scholars assume that the majority of Korean Protestants believe that Israel is God's chosen nation, but this belief is primarily visible at the rallies of far-right evangelicals who wave Israeli flags as their religious identity marker. So for this reason, Korean Christian Zionism is often seen as merely a faction of the far-right evangelical movement, marked by anti-communism, anti-feminism, anti-hate, anti-LGBTQI hate, and pro-Americanism. Indeed, chosen people's nationalism is fundamental to far-right Korean evangelicals, and Christian Zionists include these evangelicals. However, there is a difference between Christian Zionism and Christian nationalism or far-right evangelical movement. So what is Christian Zionism? And Palestinian theologian Mitri Raheb defines Christian Zionism as a Christian lobby that supports the Jewish settler colonialism of Palestinian land by using biblical theological constructs within a meta-narrative while taking local considerations into account. Thus, Raheb argues that the critical approach to Christian Zionism should be focused on what Christian Zionists do based on their belief, instead of what they actually believe. Historian of modern Israel and Jewish studies at Paris. Sorry, something, okay. The History of Modern Israel and Jewish Studies in Paris offers the 5 categories of Christian Zionism. As you see on the screen, dispensationalist, biblical, humanitarian, and political or civilizational Christian Zionism. And dispensationalists view history as divided into divine dispensations. In this human history, the restoration of Israel as a Jewish state and all the dispersed Jews returned to Israel, known as the Aliyah, will fulfill Christian end times prophecy. I'm sorry, I lost somewhere and then my trying to, okay, here we go. I'm really sorry. I just start with the dispensationalist again. So this dispensationalist view history as divided into divine dispensations. So in this human history, the restoration of Israel as a Jewish state and all the dispersed Jews returned to Israel, known as the Aliyah, will fulfill Christian end times prophecy. And dispensationalism is the oldest form of Christian Zionist political theology, which preceded Jewish political Zionism systematized in the late 19th century Europe. And biblical Christian Zionism affirms God's eternal covenant with Abraham and the land, seeking to recover Christianity's Jewish roots and festivals. And humanitarian Christian Zionism is motivated by compassion for Jews, especially after the Western Christian church's reckoning with violent anti-Semitism, culminating in the Holocaust. Its followers do not necessarily believe in Christian apocalypse, but views Israel as a moral necessity. And political or civilizational Christian Zionism supports the state of Israel as a front warrior of Western Judeo-Christian civilization against communism and Islam, intertwining Christian faith with geopolitics. And lastly, organized Christian Zionism mobilizes Christian Zionists to lobby for Israel, work for charity for Jews, such as Holocaust survivors and Jewish immigration to Israel, and educate Christians about the Holocaust, Jewish history, Judaism, and Israel. Different schools of Christian Zionism are interconnected. While Rahab's definition of Christian Zionism and Perez's categories of Christian Zionism help us understand Christian Zionism on Korean soil, the distinctive character found among Korean Christians is their belief in the unity between Israel and South Korea, or simply Korea and Israel are one. So in my presentation, you will see how Korean Christian Zionists have endeavored to embody chosen people's nationalism by integrating Israel into their hegemony about end times while responding to Korea's geopolitics and domestic political issues. So for the sake of time, I focus my presentation on 4 historical contexts: before and during Japanese annexation of Korea, the Korean War, and military dictator Park Chung-hee's regime, and contemporary Korea. Okay, if Christian Zionism originates in dispensationalist eschatology, U.S. Protestant missionaries to Korea in the late 19th century planted its early seeds. So in the early 20th century, both the missionaries and Korean Protestants engaged in doctrinal debates over amillennialism, premillennialism, and postmillennialism, and dispensationalism. These are like a debate about whether the Bible actually prophesizes the end time, or the Bible does not, or whether how to understand end time in the Christian Bible. So our millennialism argues that there is no biblical prophecy regarding the end time, and premillennialism is there will be rupture and the violent end of this world to create new world through the second coming of Jesus. And post-millennialism is more about the world is going to slowly move toward the end time, and so we don't need to worry about the violent rupture and so on. But dispensationalism, as I explained, the history is actually divided into 7 dispensations, and we are moving toward the very end time. So then, since the dispensationalism, the theological backbone of Christian Zionism, has intermittently appealed to Korean Christians. And between 1890 and 1910, the Protestant American missionary movement in Korea saw notable success. And this success corresponded with the country's political and cultural deterioration, and with widespread perceptions of American sympathy toward them. And during the Japanese colonial period, a Koreanized Christian premillennial vision emerged, but it did not revolve around Israel, Jews. And indigenous Korean religions are millenarian themes, which Korean Protestant premillennialists were familiar. And their apocalyptic visions addressed Korea's immediate political and economic suffering. A key figure in this development was Keunjoo, as you see on the photo, and he is one of the first 7 Korean Presbyterian ministers ordained by the North American Presbyterian Missionary Board in Pyongyang. And Gil was a leader of the March 1st movement, the first nationwide people's movement against Japanese colonial rule in Korea in 1919. He was one of the 33 signatories of the March 1st Declaration of Independence and imprisoned for 2 years for his involvement in the March 1st movement. And during his time in prison, Gil deeply reflected on the book of Revelation, the last book of the Christian New Testament, which is believed is some kind of apocalyptic prophecy. So after his release, Gil became an itinerant evangelist whose sermons inspired many Koreans living under Japanese military occupation. For Gil, Christ's second coming promised deliverance from all forms of suffering and colonial oppression, along with the end of the Japanese Empire. And Gil's growing influence led to another arrest by Japanese authorities who accused him of disturbing public order. Gil's dispensationalism left a formative impact on Korean Protestantism from the 1920s onward. Although shaped by American Presbyterian missionaries, his apocalyptic imagination did not revolve around Israel, Jews, or militarized conflict. Instead, as the spiritual rebirth and the dawn of new existence in God's kingdom. The early Korean Protestant Church, dispensationalism expressed a longing for liberation, resistance to colonial rule, and perseverance amid brutal oppression. Yet, hope, born of political economic misery, could also lend itself to another kind of totalitarianism, a new kingdom built upon the ruins of a fallen empire. And Korean Christian Zionists have embraced this vision. And as you know, as soon as Korea was emancipated from Japan in 1945, Korea became Korea was emancipated from 35 years of colonial subjugation from Japan. This independence was met by the division of the country, and Korea was split along the 38th parallel, with the Soviet Union administering the North and the United States governing the South. In 1948, two separate governments were established: the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Republic of Korea. Much later, Korean Christian Zionists would claim that God planned to establish South Korea and Israel in the same year of 1948. Tension took place as a full-scale war in 1950, which concluded in 1953 armistice. The Korean War caused both the division of the peninsula and the indefinite presence of U.S. armed forces in South Korea. And the Korean War opened the American century in South Korea, laying the religio-political groundwork for Korean Christian Zionism. The U.S. military presence became the hardware of Americanism, while anti-communism was a defining feature of the U.S.-Korean Evangelical Alliance. So now, let's see. So South Korea and Israel established diplomatic relations in 1962, only a year after Park Chung-hee seized power through a military coup. So Park, who styled himself a true friend of Israel, politicized the images of Jewish Israel to bolster ethno-nationalism, patriotism, and economic development. And Park's anti-communist political message centered around economic progress as a means of outpacing Korea, and Israel served as an ideal model. His administration exaggerated collective Jewish traits such as intelligence, diligence, perseverance, unity, and communal loyalty. And during the 1960s, traditionally anti-Semitic texts such as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion were translated into Korean. And Park himself also loved Adolf Hitler's book Mein Kampf when he was a young cadet. And these texts were appropriated not to incite anti-Semitic hatred, but to affirm perceived Jewish superiority, portraying the success of the Zionist nation building, the product of Jewish unity and intellectual powers. And Korean society came to view Jews and Israel through the lens of blood-based, homogeneous, an image that resonated with and reinforced colonial building efforts. And Park especially impressed by Israel's military power imbued with patriotism. So he mythologized the Arab-Israeli War of 1967, circulating a narrative that Israeli Jewish students in the while Arab students avoided conscription by changing their contact information. And Park's regime fabricated the narrative to instill staunch anti-communist patriotism among Koreans. So in response, many Koreans began to see themselves as the Jews of East Asia, referring to Korea as a second Israel, a notion that took on political and religious fantasies across different religious and political groups. And Park's philo-Semitism was a political gesture, not a religious one. And in this way, Park's Zionism, Park's Zionism, um, is a sorry. Park's in this way, Park's Zionism functioned as a militarized political mechanism for maintaining totalitarian control. Yet Korean evangelicals sacralized Park Chung-hee's politicized Israel, reinforcing God's preferential option for Jews, and by extension, their imagined East Asian twin South Korea. And Park's military regime laid the groundwork for Korean evangelicals' self-identification as chosen people. So here we are with the Israeli flag and how Christian Zionists and nationalists use Israeli flag to show off their religious and political identity. So Christian Zionism in Korea has been reconfigured through a firm belief that the allegiance to the United States inherently entailed support for Israel. In this political religious imaginary, Israel does not exist as a sovereign entity apart from the US, nor for that matter does Korea. A striking expression of this sentiment is the prominent display of Israeli flags alongside Korean and American flags at far-right Protestant rallies in Korea. The Korean public first noticed Israeli flags at far-right Christian protests against the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye, daughter of Park Chung-hee. Since the early 2000s, American flags have become staples for far-right Korean evangelical rallies, not only as symbols of anti-communism and pro-American sentiment, but also as emblems of anti-LGBTQ, anti-feminist, anti-Muslim, and anti-immigration and anti-China positions. So the display of Israeli flags by far-right Korean Protestants signifies more than solidarity with the state of Israel. It reveals their desire to align with a perceived global alliance of Christian nationalism and imperialism imbued with Zionist theology or chosen people's nationalism, a term coined by Korean scholar Kim Hyun-jun. So these flags are symbols of modern superiority, moral superiority, affirming the alliance of God's three chosen nations, Israel, South Korea, and the United States. Within this imagined coalition, Korea is envisioned as regaining its heteropatriarchal moral purity, overcoming political crisis, just as political Israel once did. For Korean evangelicals, the Israeli flag has become an emblem not merely of foreign policy support, but of religious and political identity, one that fuses Christian Zionism and nationalism into into an inseparable entity. And the emotional intimacy the right-wing Christian evangelicals feel toward Israel closely resembles their long-standing sentiment toward the United States. The Korean evangelicals have long expressed profound gratitude to the US for rescuing Korea, first from spiritual darkness through the introduction of gospel, and later from communist aggression during the Korean War. And then the war remains arguably the most powerful identity marker in Korean collective memory. Since the 2010s, Korean Christian Zionists have begun weaving Israel into the narrative of the Korean War. Initially, they highlighted Israel's 100,000 US dollar contribution to South Korea at the beginning of the war. The two additional stories have since been integrated. The first, David Ben Gurion wanted to send troops to Korea, but the leftist party Mapam and communist party Maki opposed it, and that 4,000 Jewish soldiers fought for South Koreans. The narrative of the 4,000 Jewish soldiers begins with Ma Young-sam, a former Korean diplomat to Israel. During a 2009 visit to France, Ma Young-sam encountered tombstones of Jewish World War II soldiers in Normandy. Moved by the discovery, he decided to search for Jewish veterans who had fought in the Korean War. Upon returning to Tel Aviv, Ma reached to the Jewish War Veterans Organization in Washington, D.C., and the Times of Israel. And the Jewish War Veterans confirmed that approximately 4,000 Jewish soldiers, primarily American and British, had fought the Korean War. And from 2009 to 2010, the Korean Embassy in Israel awarded medals of appreciation to 17 of these veterans. By recovering and retelling the story of Jewish contribution to Korea's defense, Korean Christian Zionists justify their alignment with Israel, asserting a sense of moral superiority over fellow Koreans who advocate for justice in Palestine, branding these solidarity activists as ignorant and ungrateful. So the Korean Christian Zionist memory of the Korean War complements chosen people's nationalism that unites the United States, South Korea, and Israel. And when Billy Graham visited South Korea in 1984 for National Revival tours, he observed a notable shift. Korean evangelical churches were no longer merely recipients of American missionaries, but now poised to become missionary-sending churches committed to fulfilling the Great Commission to spread the gospel to the ends of the earth. So Korean Christian Zionist triumphalist theology has profoundly shaped Korean Protestant missions, particularly in Muslim-majority regions of the Middle East and Central Asia, commonly referred to as the 1040 window. And Korean Christian Zionist mission theology, known as Back to Jerusalem, propagates that Korean Christians are uniquely chosen to return the gospel to its points of origin, Jerusalem, in order to complete the Great Commission and usher in the end of history. So Paul Choi, the founder of Christian Zionist missionary organization InterCP, illustrates the historical movement of the gospel from Jerusalem to Europe, then to Americas, and finally to Korea. So in this eschatological geography, Korea occupies the intermediary space between the West and the West, with its economic prosperity reinforcing its divine mandate. According to Choi's apocalyptic theology, Korean Christians must take the gospel back to Jerusalem. And reading war, famine, natural disasters, and global crisis as signs of the times, InterCP frames the present as the final chapter of human history. So since its founding in 1983, InterCP has trained and sent nearly 7,000 long-term missionaries and organized countless short-term missions, particularly to countries within the 1040 window. These missionaries are often self-sustaining professionals, such as medical workers and technicians, equipped to enter regions, including Israel, where traditional clergy may not easily gain access. And in July 2004, InterCP organized the Jerusalem Jesus March, drawing 3,000 Korean Christian participants. And the march happened only 1 month after Kim Sun-il, a Korean private contractor in Iraq, was beheaded by an Islamist group. Holding Kim as a hostage, the group had demanded that the South Korean government withdraw its troops from Iraq and abandon plans to send additional forces. Kim's death heightened the public awareness of the dangers surrounding Korean evangelical missions in Muslim-majority countries, especially in regions entangled in US-led military operations. So in such a context, South Korea was often perceived as a surrogate of US imperial power. And despite public protest, the Korean government deployed 20,000 troops, a mixture of medics, combatants, and engineers, rotated in and out of Iraq from 2004 to 2008, making South Korea the third largest contributor of troops. In 2006, Intercp organized a peace march in Kabul, mobilizing 927 Korean evangelicals. Upon arrival, the Afghan government deported them for offending local people. The following year, the Taliban held the hostages of 23 short-term missionaries from the Semul Korean Presbyterian Church. This mission team was guided by two Intercp affiliated missionaries. So during the ensuing negotiations between the South Korean government and the Taliban, two male hostages were executed. The remaining hostages were released only after an unknown amount of ransom was paid. The Semul hostage crisis ignited widespread public criticism of Korean evangelical missions in Muslim-majority countries for failing to understand religious, cultural, and political complexities in those regions. Nonetheless, these back to Jerusalem-style missionaries efforts continue. And Korean Christian Zionist missionary activities is inseparable from their commitment to the Aliyah movement. The Christian Zionists believe that the second coming of Jesus can occur only once dispersed Jews are fully restored to Israel. So the Aliyah means that Jews should return to Israel. And Korean Christian Zionists' sense of chosen people internalizes their belief in God's protection, fueled by a theology of heroic martyrdom and moral superiority. However, this conviction is also deliberately cultivated by Korean Christian Zionist leaders. And what I am interested here is how they see North Korea. Korean Christian Zionists desire to expand the Christian empire not only in the spiritual realm but also on earth. And Korean Christian Zionists have diligently labored to build a spiritual empire. And their missionary work becomes a means of materializing this empire on earth. And this Christian kingdom must reach North Korea. Korean Christian Zionists believe that God will bring peace and reunification to the Korean peninsula when God gathers the Jewish people in Israel, Palestine. So North Korea holds deep affective significance for Korean evangelicals because many of whom many of Korean evangelicals trace their spiritual lineage to Protestant immigrants from the North. So for Korean Christian Zionists, there are two ends of the earth. One is Jerusalem, and the other is Pyongyang, once revered as the Jerusalem of East Asia. And although South Korean evangelicals have prayed for the collapse of the North Korean regime for more than 70 years, the communist dictatorship still stands. And from this vantage point, the eschaton will not only consummate the full restoration of Israel, but also the reunification and spiritual rebirth of Korea. Korean Christian Zionists' love for Israel thus mirrors desire for Korea, an unreachable yet deeply nostalgic homeland, sanctified in their theological imagination. So as I just conclude my presentation, so this is a kind of a summary of my whole presentation, how Christian Zionism. So on the very left part is Christian Zionism is contemporary phenomena, and you can think about the roots and what has influenced the entire political history of Christian Zionism. And then this is some of the examples and the list of Korean Christian Zionist organizations. I also shared my report on Christian Zionism and anti-Christian Zionist movements and solidarity with the Palestine movement with the Sugiro and others. So you can check out those resources. And finally, I have a few questions because I'm a Christian social ethicist and theologian. From feminist theological perspective, Rita Nakashima Bragg and Rebecca Parker warn against by nostalgia about the fallen kingdom, and which could carry the danger of an arrogant and naive sense of national exceptionalism. So in that way, Brock and Parker actually challenge us how to read the Christian Bible without nostalgia of fallen kingdom. And at the same time, in the Christian church, always Israel and Zion are called again and again in relation to Christ's victory, and how to overcome this triumphalist rivalry can be a big challenge in the Christian church. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor
Very
Pae. We're gonna take some time
sorry, I have
for.
to apologize. Yeah.
Oh, well, this might be a good opportunity because you did cut out a few times throughout your presentation, but this can be a good time for us to also catch up on some information that we might not have fully heard or questions that we might have. If people have any questions, could you can put them in the chat or you can use the raise hand function. And I'm seeing in the chat for asking if you could clarify the 1040 window, the ALIA and the inter-CP. What are they and why are they called such?
So its 1040 window is the region, the countries that located within the 10 and 40. So like a lot of countries are located in that region are Muslim majority countries in Central Asia and North Africa. So that's the term, like a 1040 window. And then the Aliyah means the restoration of Jews in Palestine. So then when all the full restoration of Jews in Israel Palestine must happen, and the Aliyah is the term. The Aliyah is Hebrew, so it's not. And then InterCP is the name of organization. I didn't name InterCP, but they just call themselves InterCP. And in Korea, InterCP is called Intercom, but they just call themselves InterCP. So it's a missionary organization.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. And I'll read along the comments that I'm seeing. And again, if you have a question that you'd like to ask unmuted, feel free to use the raise hand function. But I'll read two things that I'm seeing here. So from Elizabeth, I'm seeing, I am amazed by how thorough your presentation is. I had no idea, but I can totally agree with my experience in Fort McMurray, Alberta, and my church, the church with Korean Christians. I was always amazed how dedicated, how knowledgeable, how generous, how helpful, and how loving they were all the time. The Zionism reality was never even mentioned at that time many years ago. And the next one is a question. So you mentioned the protocols of the elders of Zion and Mein Kampf as texts that Korean evangelicals use to justify their support for Israel and Zionism. Can you expand on that? And how did that happen?
So the protocols of the elders of Zion is classic anti-Semitic text published in Europe at the turn of the 20th century, in the late 19th century. So the protocols of the elders of Zion just basically is about Jewish conspiracy, how like Jews, the European Jews, formed a secret network and overpowered the entire politics and banking system and so on. So it was a classic like Jewish conspiracy theory, which has no substance. And then Mein Kampf is Adolf Hitler's kind of manifesto, and why the Germans should be united, and why like Jews were like children of evil, and so on. And these books were translated to Korean during the Japanese colonial period. It was not like after emancipation. You can think of the relationship between the Imperial Japan and Germany in up until like World War II. So these texts were translated into Korean and then introduced. And then just to think about the reality, Koreans had not been exposed to Jews or Jewish culture. So the Koreans did not have knowledge about Judaism or Jews, but then these texts were introduced, and then these texts all like caricatured Jews as like intelligent, but they are evil, or they are rich, but they are evil. Something like there are a lot of the description of Jews was colored with some sort of positive connotations. So these texts were, when Koreans read these texts, they saw these texts as evidence to prove that Jews were superior people and because they were chosen people by God. That's one way to explain that. And then another question, yeah, dispensationalism first appeared in the European uh, around 1980. Usually, people call out John Darby, who was um, Irish, but Anglican priest who lived in Britain, and he read a Christian Bible, and then dispensationalism is still yeah, it's still appealing to many Christian evangelicals in the United States. I forgot his name. In the one of Donald Trump's spiritual advisors is a dispensationalist. He actually, based on his dispensationalist reading of the Christian Bible, he affirmed that Donald Trump was anointed by God for God's end time plans.
The next question I'm seeing is what organizations, churches, movements exist to counter Korean Christian Zionists in Korea?
Okay, there are many churches. I shared when I just shared the final draft on the report of Korean Christian Zionism. So the first of all, National Council of Korean Churches has been always like advocating for the rights and human rights of Palestinians and justice for Palestine. And they have always against Christian Zionism. So and the National Council of Churches is organization of multiple Korean Protestant churches. There is a strong presence of anti-Zionist Christian theology within Korean Christianity. Also, contemporary Minjung theologians also advocate for anti-Christian Zionist. More, it's can say instead of anti-Christian Zionist theology, we can say like anti-war and pro-peace Christian theology that try to overcome Christian triumphalism.
Yeah, thank you for your explanations. Are there any other questions that people have? Okay, I'm seeing in the chat. I have heard a Japanese evangelical Christian try to tie Japanese history to ancient Israel. So I wonder if there's some phenomenon within Christian Zionism around the world where people are trying to draw connections to Israel. I also recently heard a white American Christian man refer to Korea's March 1st movement as a Christian movement. I have wondered if Keunjoo and other Christian participation in the liberation movement from the Japanese is being explained in Korean Christian evangelical circles within Korea to be a Christian movement, and how these narratives may be cross-pollinating across borders in religious spaces.
This is like a good question, and well, a lot of scholars argue that the Christian participation March First movement, and then the March First movement, it could be a like really it's a critical moment for the early Korean Protestant church because March First movement. Sorry, a lot of Korean Protestants took leadership during the March First movement. And then American missionaries also participated in the March First movement because their students and their church members were killed and tortured um, by Japanese military police. And then if you look at the history, the March First movement leaders were also inspired by U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. I just keep forgetting people's names these days. Woodrow Wilson's, it's like the people's right to self-discernment for their like self-governance. And yet the United States did not help March First movement at all. And then at that time, Protestants equated like the United States to Protestantism, but then they didn't see any help from the United States. And the March First movement failed, and then the Japanese military government brutally suppressed any kind of independence movement, even though they changed their colonial rules after the March First movement. So after the failure of March First movement, and Korean Protestant, like a lot of Protestants actually left the church, and they joined communist activism and communist party, where some people could not really confess their faith within God anymore. And Gilson was a different case, and he kept his faith. He completely stopped participating in any kind of political activism because for him, this kind of evil political structure, such as the colonial power, cannot be stopped or cannot be resisted or cannot be ended by human power. Only God could end these evil political structures. So for Kirsanju, the failure of March First movement was to reestablish his Korean Protestant faith, while many left the church. Check the question again. Yeah, there are the multiple interpretations of the March First movement. Well, this is just a part of Kirsanju's story.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're pretty much close to the hour. So thank you for the questions that you have posed, and thank you also, Professor Pae, for answering them. Um, Now, we'd like to share some actions for us. And Professor Pae, I believe you said that you also have an action for us that you would like to share too from Friends of Sabile North America. Yes?
Yeah, there are a few like the US based organizations that certainly you can be part of. One is Friends of North America, Friends of Sabile in North America, and then they always want to have some like a supportive letter or endorsement from Asian American Christian groups. So if you identify with like Korean Christianity, a Korean Christian church in the United States, and certainly you can be part of it. There is also like Christians united against Israel, or like Christians for Palestine, and there are several organizations that look for the strong Asian American presence. Thank you, Sugiro, for posting the information of those organizations.
Yeah, thank you. And the Christians for Free Palestine, they do currently have solidarity circles right now, and currently there is one for those who identify as Asian American, which I am also co-facilitating. So if you are interested, please let me know. And Echo will also be sharing some actions for us from Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network. So yeah, so in the chat you can see some of the links, and there are also links that Echo is sharing with us. You can join for Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network. If you would like to join as a member, if you haven't already, you can sign up using the link that you see in the chat box. And there is a membership form there. And the second ask from Korea Peace Now is to register to join for the 2026 Advocacy Days. KPNGN has been having advocacy days every year. And this year it is happening. Hold on one second. When is that happening? Echo.
We're actually calling it Korea Peace Advocacy Summer. So it's going to happen not just one designated week, but throughout the summer starting June.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah. So please, if you can, join in on Korea Peace Summer. And finally, if you are interested in joining the faith-based caucus of Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network, sorry, pollen. You can contact me. You can let me know. You can also let Earl know as well, or you can let Echo know, and we'll connect you into our list serve. We meet every fourth Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Zoom. Oh, and I'm seeing, yeah, Jenny has shared something in the chat for us. Thank you. Jenny, do you want to quickly explain to us what you are sharing?
My colleague with Peace Catalyst, Salim Anfous in Palestine, is also a licensed tour guide. So if you ever want to visit the Holy Land and you want non-Christian Zionist talking points, feel free to reach out to Salim at his Instagram link there. Instagram.com, salim.anfous.
Yeah, thank you so much. Especially because especially for Christians who are interested, it seems that the entry points are usually through more Zionist networks. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Actually,
And
can I just comment one thing on the Holy Land tourism? It's for the sake of time, I didn't mention the Holy Land tourism. Well, South Korea before COVID-19 pandemic, every 60,000 Korean tourists visited Israel every year. And then the Korean tourists usually they identify themselves as Christian pilgrims, and these Korean tourists are larger than the entire Asian tourists combined. So the Israel Ministry of Tourism always sends special gifts to Korean Protestant evangelicals in Korea so that they can strengthen their relationship through this Holy Land tourism. So the Holy Land tourism is something that spreads Christian Zionism in the Korean church.
yeah, thank you. Debbie, I see your hand up.
Yeah. Excuse me. I wanted to mention that Sabeel, which is let's see, what's it? Liberation Theology Center in Jerusalem, and it's a Christian center. And they have POSNA is actually a North American branch of Sabeel, but Sabeel always is having tour groups that could go in and be taken with local pastors, for instance, like Mitri Rahab is probably a part of that. So they're really good people, and it's Sabeel, Sabeel.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to save the chat also. And since there are some great resources that people are sharing and also events too that are coming up. I know that in a few days, there's the DC gathering, the Joint Christian Advocacy Summit happening May 5th through 7th. I think the deadline for that was a couple of days ago. But hopefully it looks like there are more action days, July 5th through 7th. And that is to counter Christians United for Israel. their annual lobby summit. So if you are able to join, if you can spread the good word to your communities too of these events, please do. And I will be sure to also gather these links and resources and send them out to y'all. But thank you everyone for joining today, and thank you so much, Professor Pae, and also, yeah, I'll send out the Google Drive too, so that you can check out Professor Pae's work. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.